The room was buzzing with the kind of polite chatters you only hear at charity auctions, soft clinks of wine glasses, murmurs about the weather, and the occasional laugh that carried a little too far. I stood by the table I'd spent weeks preparing, adjusting a frame that held one of Lily's old sketches, a watercolor of a sunflower field she'd painted when she was 16. It was the centerpiece of the event, a fundraiser I'd started in her name after she was taken from us 7 years ago in a car accident. My hands lingered on the frame, tracing the edges where her pencil marks still showed. Then I felt it, a sharp push against my wrist, firm enough to make me flinch. "Don't touch anything, Mom," Nathan said, his voice loud enough to cut through the hum of the crowd. "You'll mess it up." I looked up, stunned, my hand hovering mid-air like it didn't belong to me. Nathan, my 38-year-old son, stood there in his pressed suit, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking toward the guests as if to make sure they'd heard. A few heads turned. A woman in a navy dress paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. Another guest coughed into his napkin, pretending not to notice. I felt heat creep up my neck, not from anger, but from the sting of being made small. In front of people I'd known for years, I forced a smile, the kind you learn to wear when you're trying to keep the peace. "Just fixing the frame," I said softly. But Nathan was already turning away, straightening a stack of auction pamphlets like he was the host. He'd taken over the event this year, picked the venue, the caterer, even the music. He'd swapped out Lily's favorite jazz playlist for some generic acoustic loop that felt like it belonged in a dentist's office. And the worst part, he'd replaced her sunflower sketch on the main display with a glossy photo of him and his wife, Melissa, grinning on a beach somewhere. I'd noticed it the moment I walked in. Of course I noticed. I stepped back from the table, my hands clasped, to keep them from shaking. The room moved on. Someone bit on a quilt, another laughed too loudly. But for me, time stopped. This wasn't new. Nathan had been chipping away at me for years, ever since Thomas, my husband, passed 6 years ago from a heart attack. After Lily's accident and then Thomas, I thought Nathan and I would lean on each other. Instead, he started building walls around me brick by brick. It started small. He moved me into his house in this quiet Oregon suburb, saying I shouldn't be alone in our old family home. "It's too big, Mom," he'd said, his voice all concern. "What if you fall?" But soon, it wasn't just about the house. It was the way he'd reorganize my kitchen shelves, lock the medicine cabinet, even set timers for when I could use the oven. He'd say it was for my safety, but it felt like he was erasing me, one decision at a time. That day at the auction, as I stood there, the sting of his words still fresh, I realized this wasn't just about a frame or a fundraiser. It was about control. Nathan didn't just want to run the show. He wanted to run me. The guests were still milling around, oblivious to the weight of what had just happened. I slipped out to the patio, the cool air hitting my face like a wake-up call. My coat was still inside, but I didn't care. I just needed to breathe. I looked down at my hand, the one he'd pushed away. It was the same hand that had held Lily's when she took her first steps. The same hand that had graded papers late into the night when I was a high school English teacher. It had every right to touch that frame, to touch anything. And in that moment, something shifted. I wasn't just hurt, I was done. Hey, before we go on, where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It means the world. The air outside the auction hall was crisp, the kind of Oregon evening that smells faintly of pine and damp earth. I stood on the patio, my breath visible in the twilight, trying to shake off the sting of Nathan's words. "Don't touch anything, Mom." They echoed in my head, not just from that moment, but from 100 others, quieter ones that had piled up like dust in a house you don't clean often enough. I'd let it happen, hadn't I? Bit by bit, I'd handed over pieces of myself, to keep the peace, to keep what was left of our family from crumbling. But standing there, with the chatter of the fundraiser muffled behind glass doors, I realized peace wasn't what I'd gotten. It was erasure. Back when Thomas was alive, our home was a place of warmth, books stacked on every surface, Lily's sketches taped to the fridge, jazz drifting from the living room. After he passed, and then Lily, the house felt too big, too hollow. Nathan convinced me to move in with him and Melissa, just a few miles away, in a sleek, modern house that felt more like a showroom than a home. "You shouldn't be alone, Mom," he'd said, his voice all finance manager polish, the kind he used to close deals at work. "It's not safe for you." I believed him at first. Grief makes you believe a lot of things, but it didn't take long for the rules to creep in. At first it was small, Nathan rearranging my spice rack for efficiency, locking the medicine cabinet so I had to ask for my own aspirin. Then it got bigger. He set up an app on my phone to track my movements, saying it was for emergencies. He planned my meals, printed out schedules in crisp fonts, grilled chicken, no salt, steamed broccoli. "Your cholesterol, Mom," he'd say, never asking if I even had high cholesterol. I didn't. Melissa, his wife, stayed out of it, her eyes always on her phone, like she'd learned to dodge conflict the way you sidestep a puddle. I went back inside that night, grabbed my coat, and drove home. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. I walked past the kitchen where Nathan's meal plan was taped to the fridge like a decree, and headed to the small room at the back of the house, Lily's old art studio. We used to spend hours there, her with her paints, me with my books, laughing over her terrible attempts at realism. "Stick to abstracts, kid," I'd tease. She'd roll her eyes and keep painting. Now the room was a storage space filled with boxes and a treadmill Nathan insisted I needed. Her easel was gone, her canvases stacked in a corner like forgotten promises. I don't know what made me open the drawer of her old desk that night. Maybe it was the ache of seeing her sunflower sketch pushed aside at the auction. Maybe it was just instinct. But there, beneath a pile of dried-up paint tubes, I found a wooden box, small and unassuming, the kind Thomas used to keep for important papers. My heart caught as I opened it. Inside was a letter in his handwriting, the kind of precise, slanted script he used when designing blueprints as an architect. "Eleanor," it read, "this house is yours, always. Only sign it over when Nathan learns to respect what it means. Keep a clean copy, just in case." Tucked beneath was a copy of the deed to our family home, unsigned, untouched. I sat there, the letter heavy in my hands, and felt something shift. Thomas had always known Nathan's ambition could outgrow his kindness. He'd seen it even when I didn't, when I was too busy grieving to notice the way Nathan's concern always came with strings. I pressed the letter to my chest, whispering, "I'm not ready yet, Tom, but I'm getting there." The next morning I called Clara. She was my best friend for decades, a painter with a laugh that could fill a room, until Nathan cut her out after Lily's funeral. She'd argued with him when he blamed me for letting Lily drive that night, said it was unfair to pin her accident on me. He'd called her meddling, blocked her number, and I'd been too lost in grief to fight for her. But now I needed her. "Clara," I said when she picked up, her voice warm but cautious. "It's Eleanor. I need to talk." There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "Took you long enough." Clara met me at a diner the next day, her gray curls loose and her eyes sharp. Over coffee, I told her everything. Nathan's control, the auction, the way he'd made me feel like a guest in my own life. She didn't interrupt, just stirred her tea and listened. When I finished, she slid her hand across the table. You're not invisible, Ellie. You never were. That afternoon, I called Richard Coleman, Thomas's old friend and our estate lawyer. I found the deed, I told him. I need to know my options. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Come to my office tomorrow. Bring everything." Before I hung up, I started recording my conversations with Nathan on an old phone I kept in my nightstand. Not for revenge, but for proof. Every time he'd say, "You're not thinking straight, Mom," or "Let me handle it," I hit record. I wasn't sure what I'd do with them yet, but I knew I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. Back in Lily's studio, I pulled one of her canvases from the corner, a messy abstract in blues and golds she'd painted in college. I hung it on the wall, right where Nathan's minimalist clock used to be. It wasn't much, but it felt like a start. I stood there, staring at the colors, and whispered to her, "I'm not letting him erase you or me." The days after finding Thomas's letter felt like waking up from a long, heavy sleep. I moved through Nathan's house, his house, not mine, I kept reminding myself, with a new kind of quiet. Not the silence of surrender, but the kind you hold when you're planning something. I'd started noticing things I hadn't before. The way Nathan's voice sharpened when I reached for a second cup of coffee. The way Melissa's eyes darted to him for approval before she spoke to me. It wasn't just control. It was a performance. And I'd been cast as the frail, forgetful mother who needed saving. But I wasn't that woman, not anymore. One Saturday morning, I overheard Nathan on the phone in the garage, his voice low but clear. "Yeah, family barbecue tomorrow. Bring the kids. Mom won't be there." My stomach twisted, not because I wasn't invited, but because he'd assumed I wouldn't show up, like I was already gone. I stood in the hallway, a laundry basket balanced on my hip, and felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years, defiance. I didn't say anything to him that day. Instead, I went to Lily's old studio and pulled out her sketchbook, the one she'd filled with drawings during her last summer. The pages were worn, some smudged with charcoal, others bright with watercolor. One sketch caught my eye, a portrait of me, sitting in the garden reading a book. Lily had captured the way my hair fell across my cheek, the soft curve of my smile. I traced the lines with my finger, remembering how she'd laughed when I teased her about making me look too young. "You're timeless, Mom," she'd said. I tucked the sketchbook under my arm. If Nathan thought he could write me out of this family, I'd remind him who'd written the first chapters. The next afternoon, I dressed carefully, not flashy, just a linen blouse and a scarf Lily had given me years ago, the kind of outfit that says you're here to stay. I walked the short distance to the backyard where the barbecue was in full swing. The air smelled of grilled burgers and sunscreen. Kids ran through the grass, their laughter mingling with the clink of beer bottles. Nathan's colleagues from the finance firm stood in clusters, their wives swapping stories about school districts. I spotted Melissa by the food table arranging napkins with the precision of a general. Nathan was at the grill, tongs in hand, his laugh booming across the yard. I stepped through the gate, the sketchbook still under my arm. Melissa saw me first, her smile freezing like a cracked windshield. "Eleanor," she said, her voice too high. "I didn't know you were coming." Nathan turned, his eyes narrowing for a split second before he plastered on a grin. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, loud enough for the nearest guests to glance over. "Thought I'd drop by," I said, my voice steady. "It's a family event, isn't it?" I walked to the food table, ignoring the way Melissa's hands hovered like she was guarding it. I set the sketchbook down, open to the portrait Lily had drawn of me. A little boy with ketchup on his chin wandered over, peering at the page. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing at the sketch. "That's me," I said, smiling. "My daughter drew it." His eyes widened. "It's really good." I nodded. "She was really good." Nathan crossed. The yard in 3 strides, his grin gone. "Mom, this is kind of a private thing," he said, lowering his voice. "We didn't think you'd want to deal with the crowd." I met his gaze. "I'm family, Nathan. I don't mind a crowd." A few guests were watching now, their conversations trailing off. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make a scene. I just stood there, letting the weight of my presence do the talking. Nathan gestured toward a chair at the edge of the yard, far from the action. "Why don't you sit there? I'll get you a plate." I didn't move. "I'm fine right here," I said, and turned to chat with a neighbor about the roses in my old garden. I stayed for 20 minutes, just long enough to leave the sketchbook, open on the table, the portrait facing out like a quiet rebellion. As I walked back through the gate, I heard Nathan's voice pick up again, louder, like he was trying to drown out what I'd done. But I'd made my point. I wasn't invisible. That night I met Clara at her studio, a cluttered space filled with half-finished canvases and the smell of turpentine. I told her about the barbecue, the sketchbook, the way Nathan's face had tightened. She laughed, a deep, throaty sound. "You're stirring the pot, Ellie. I love it." Then she grew serious. "What's next?" I pulled out the deed from my bag, the one Thomas had left me. "This," I said. "I want it in my name, clean, and I want you to hold it." Clara's eyes widened, but she nodded. We called Richard, the lawyer, and by the next day, I was in his office, signing papers that gave me a life estate in the house. Clara would take ownership after I was gone, but until then, it was mine, untouchable by Nathan or anyone else. Richard slid the finalized copy across his desk. "You're sure?" he asked. I signed my name, the pen steady. "I've never been surer." I didn't tell Nathan. Instead, I printed a copy of the deed and left it in his home office, tucked beneath a stack of his financial reports. I knew he'd find it eventually, and he did. 2 days later, he stormed into the kitchen, the paper crumpled in his fist. "What is this, Mom?" His voice was sharp, like a blade catching light. "You're giving our house to Clara? Are you serious?" I stirred my tea, slow and deliberate, the spoon clinking against the mug. "It's not our house, Nathan," I said, meeting his eyes. "It's mine." He laughed, a bitter sound. "You wouldn't even be here if I hadn't taken you in. You were falling apart after Dad died." I set the spoon down. "I was grieving," I said. "Not incapable, there's a difference." He paced the kitchen, his hands raking through his hair. "This is insane. Clara's using you. You're throwing away our family for her." I folded my napkin, my movements calm. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said. "I'm making sure I'm not erased." He stopped, his mouth opening like he had more to say, but I stood and walked out, leaving him with the deed and the silence. I went back to Lily's studio, sat on the floor, and opened her sketchbook again. The portrait stared back at me, and for the first time in years, I felt like the woman in that drawing, timeless, not faded. I wasn't just fighting for a house, I was fighting for me, and I was only getting started. The kitchen was quiet the morning after Nathan found the deed. Too quiet, like the air was holding its breath. I sipped my coffee, the mug warm against my palms, and waited. Nathan didn't come down for breakfast. Melissa slipped out early, muttering something about a work call. But I knew it was coming. Nathan wasn't the type to let something like this slide. Sure enough, a week later, a legal notice arrived, delivered by a man in a gray uniform who avoided my eyes as I signed for it. The envelope was heavy, official, the kind that carries bad news dressed up in formal language. Nathan was suing me. He claimed I'd been coerced, that I wasn't in my right mind when I signed the house over to Clara. Mental incompetence, the papers said. Fraudulent influence. My hands shook as I read, not from fear, but from a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. He thought he could rewrite my story. He was wrong. I called Richard, my lawyer, and we met at his office the next day. Richard, with his steady voice and silver hair, had been Thomas's friend since their college days. He'd drawn up our wills, sat with us through Lily's funeral. He knew what this house meant. "Nathan's playing a hard game," he said, flipping through the legal notice. "But we've got harder evidence." I handed him the recordings from my old phone, the ones I'd started making after finding Thomas's letter. Nathan's voice, sharp and dismissive. "You're not thinking straight, Mom. Just let me handle it." Richard listened, his jaw tightening. "This," he said, "is our anchor." The courthouse was a squat brick building in downtown Oregon, smelling of polished wood and old coffee. I wore a navy sweater, the one Lily used to borrow when she was cold. It felt like armor. Nathan sat across the aisle in a tailored suit, his face a mask of confidence, but his fingers tapped restlessly on the table. Melissa wasn't there. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense braid, scanned the docket. "We're here to address a dispute over a property transfer from Eleanor Harper to Clara Bennett, with a life estate clause. The petitioner claims coercion and mental incompetence. Miss Harper, how do you respond?" I stood, my voice steady. "I respond with the truth, Your Honor." A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats, and I swear I saw Nathan flinch. Richard went first, presenting a medical evaluation I'd done 3 months earlier, confirming my mental clarity. My doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, had submitted a sworn statement. "Eleanor Harper is fully capable of making her own decisions." Then came the recordings. Richard played one, Nathan's voice filling the courtroom like a cold wind. "You don't need to worry about the finances, Mom. You're not good with numbers anymore." The judge's pen paused. Nathan's lawyer objected. Hearsay, he called it. But Richard countered, "It's evidence of a pattern of intimidation." Clara took the stand next, her painter's hands folded calmly. "I've known Eleanor for 30 years, she said. She's not confused or coerced. She's protecting her life, her home, from someone who's tried to control both." The judge asked about the transaction, the appraisal, the terms. Clara answered with the precision of someone who'd spent years balancing art commissions and budgets. Nathan's lawyer tried to paint her as opportunistic, but Clara just smiled. "I didn't buy a house for profit. I bought it to give my friend her freedom." Nathan didn't testify. His lawyer must have known the ground was crumbling. At 11:15 a.m., the judge set her glasses down. "This court finds no evidence of coercion or incompetence. The transfer stands. The petition is dismissed with prejudice." The gavel hit like a door slamming shut. Nathan walked out without looking at me, his shoulders stiff, his steps quick. I stayed in my seat, letting the moment settle. Richard touched my arm. "You didn't just win a case, Eleanor. You drew a line. When I got home, the house felt different, like it was breathing again." I went to the garage, pulled out cans of paint I'd bought on a whim the week before, soft blue, pale gold, a deep plum that reminded me of Lily's favorite scarf. Nathan had always insisted on beige, neutral cells, he'd said, like my home was a product. I started with the living room, brushing blue across the walls, the color catching the light like a lake at dawn. I didn't measure, didn't tape the edges. I just painted. When I finished, I hung one of Lily's abstracts, a swirl of gold and green above the fireplace. The room felt alive again, like it remembered who we were. That weekend, I invited Clara and a few old friends over. Not for a fundraiser, just for dinner. I played Lily's jazz playlist, the one Nathan had banned from the auction. We ate lasagna, the kind with too much cheese, and laughed over stories about our teaching days, about Lily sneaking glitter into my lesson plans. One friend a retired librarian named Susan, raised her glass. "To Eleanor," she said, "for taking back what's hers." I smiled, my throat tight. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a guest at my own table. The next day, I sat down at my old desk, the one Nathan had pushed to the corner of the guest room, and started writing. Not a journal, but a talk, something I wanted to share online. I titled it, "Not Invisible: Reclaiming Your Life After 60. I recorded it in Lily's studio, surrounded by her paintings, and talked about what it meant to be silenced by the people you love and how to find your voice again. Clara helped me upload it to a small community platform. I didn't expect much, just a way to let the words out. But by the end of the week, the views were climbing and comments poured in from people I'd never met. One woman wrote, "You gave me the courage to say no to my son." Another said, "I'm not too old to start over." I read them all, my heart fuller than it had been in years. I didn't know it then, but that talk was about to change everything. The house felt different. Now, not just because of the blue walls or the jazz humming through the speakers, it was lighter, like it had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. I started small, reclaiming pieces of myself I'd let slip away. I pulled Lily's old easel out of storage and set it up in her studio, now my studio again. I wasn't much of a painter, but I'd dip a brush in color just to feel the motion, to remember how Lily used to lose herself in it. One afternoon, I invited Clara over and we spent hours messing around with watercolors, laughing like we were kids again. "You're starting something here, Ellie," she said, wiping paint off her cheek. I didn't know it then, but she was right. That's how the art group started. I put up a flyer at the local library. Painting for the soul, open to anyone over 60 who's tired of fading into the background. The first meeting was just 5 of us, gathered in my living room with mismatched mugs and a plate of oatmeal, cookies. There was Susan, the librarian who'd toasted me at dinner, Margaret, a retired nurse with a wicked sense of humor, and a few others who'd seen my online talk. We didn't just paint. We talked about kids who didn't listen, about lives we'd put on hold, about the quiet ache of being invisible. I shared a little about Nathan, not the whole story, but enough. Margaret nodded, her brush pausing. "My daughter tried to move me to a home last year," she said. "I told her I'd rather paint my own walls than let her choose my cage." We all laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that carries truth. The online talk I'd posted, not invisible, kept spreading. I checked the comments late at night, reading messages from strangers who felt like friends. "You made me feel seen," one wrote. "I'm 68 and just told my son I'm keeping my car keys." I'd smile, my chest warm, and think of Lily. She'd have loved this, the way art and words could pull people together. I started recording more talks, short ones about finding your voice, about not letting grief or family define your edges. Clara called it my quiet revolution. I called it breathing again. Then one Tuesday morning, an email landed in my inbox, no subject line, just a name I didn't recognize, Sophie Reynolds. The message was short, almost shy. "Dear Miss Harper, I saw your talk online. I think you might be my grandmother. My mom was Lily Harper. I'm 19 and I'd like to meet you if that's okay. I don't want anything, just to know you." My heart stopped. Lily had a daughter? I sat there staring at the screen, my coffee going cold. Lily had never mentioned a pregnancy, not to me, not to Thomas. She'd been 21 when she died, so full of plans for art school, always sketching, always dreaming. How could I not have known? I called Clara, my voice shaking. "Read this," I said, forwarding the email. She was at my house in 20 minutes, her eyes wide as she scanned the screen. "Ellie, this is real. You need to meet her." I hesitated, then replied to Sophie, suggesting a cafe in town, a quiet place with soft lighting and strong tea. 2 days later, I sat in a corner booth, my hands wrapped around a mug, watching the door. When she walked in, I knew her instantly. She had Lily's eyes, wide and curious, and that same tilt of the head when she was nervous. She carried a backpack, and from it, she pulled a small sketch, one of Lily's, a bridge over a river, painted in bold reds and purples. "Mom kept this," Sophie said, her voice soft. "She said it was for her mother." I couldn't speak at first. I took the sketch, my fingers trembling, recognizing Lily's brushstrokes. Sophie told me her story. Lily had been pregnant during her last year of college. Hadn't told us because she feared judgment, feared it would change how we saw her. She'd raised Sophie alone for a year before the accident, leaving her with a friend who became her guardian. Sophie only learned about me after finding my talk online, hearing me describe Lily's laugh, her love for color. "It felt like I already knew you," she said. "We got a DNA test just to be sure, but I didn't need it. Those eyes were proof enough." The results came back 99.9%. Sophie was my granddaughter. Over the next few weeks, we started building something fragile but beautiful. I showed her Lily's old sketchbooks, taught her how to mix paints the way her mother did. She'd laugh, saying she was terrible at it, but her lines had the same boldness. I cooked her Lily's favorite, lemon ricotta pancakes, and left a chair empty at the table for one dinner, then asked her to sit there the next. I called Richard and revised my will. Nathan was out, not out of anger, but because he'd chosen control over connection. The house, the foundation I'd started in Lily's name, Lily's canvas, to fund art programs for kids who'd lost parents, would go to Sophie and a local women's shelter for older women escaping family control. It wasn't just about protecting my legacy. It was about building one. The morning of my 63rd birthday, the house smelled of lemon zest and fresh paint, a mix that felt like a promise kept. I stood in the living room, now a soft blue that caught the Oregon sunlight like a sigh of relief, and looked at the walls. Lily's paintings hung where Nathan's beige rules once reigned, bold strokes of color, each one a piece of her I'd brought back. I'd spent the last year turning this house into something more than wood and windows. It was a home again, mine, filled with laughter and the kind of warmth you can't fake. I'd invited a small crowd to celebrate, not a grand event, just the people who mattered. Clara was there, her gray curls tied back, arranging a tray of her famous blueberry scones. Susan from the art group brought a stack of poetry books, insisting we read one aloud. Sophie, my granddaughter, my miracle, was in the kitchen, decorating a lopsided chocolate cake with candles she'd picked out herself. The backyard was set with folding chairs, a string of fairy lights, and Lily's old jazz playlist humming through a Bluetooth speaker. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As the sun dipped low, casting golden ribbons across the grass, I stepped onto the patio and tapped my glass. The chatter quieted and all eyes turned to me. I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment, not heavy, but full. "This house," I said, my voice clear, "was once a place I thought I'd lost. It was a fortress when Thomas and Lily were here, then a prison when someone else decided what I could touch." I paused, glancing at Sophie, her eyes bright with something like pride. "Nathan told me, in front of a room full of people, don't touch anything." But I did. I touched the deed. I touched the truth. I touched the legacy we built. Someone cheered, a soft ripple of laughter followed, and I raised my hand, not to hush them, but to mark the end of a long sentence. "I'm not done touching," I said. "I'm painting, I'm teaching, I'm here, and I'm not fading away." The applause wasn't loud, but it was real, the kind that settles into your bones. Sophie crossed the yard and hugged me, her arms tight, and I felt Lily in that embrace, a thread that hadn't broken. Later, after the cake was gone and the guests had drifted home, Sophie and I sat on the back porch, the garden stretching out before us. I'd replanted it last spring, each section named for something I'd reclaimed: freedom, creativity, love. The roses were blooming, their petals soft against the dusk. Sophie leaned against me, her sketchbook open on her lap. "Do you think Nathan will come back?" she asked, her voice quiet. "He already did," I said, thinking of the clipped voicemail he'd left a month ago, demanding to talk. I hadn't called back. He just didn't find what he was looking for. Sophie nodded, her pencil moving across the page, sketching the garden. We didn't speak after that, just sat together, the wind carrying the scent of roses and the faint hum of a neighbor's radio. I've learned something through all this, something I wish I'd known sooner. You don't heal by erasing pain. You heal by building over it. This house, this garden, this life I've reclaimed, they're not about forgetting Nathan's push or Lily's absence. They're about choosing what grows in their place. To anyone listening, especially if you're over 50, feeling like your voice has been drowned out by someone you love, you're not too old to start again. Touch the things that matter. Your story, your truth, your legacy. They're yours to hold no matter who tells you otherwise. As Sophie sketched beside me, I looked out at the garden, at the roses named for love, and felt it, not just for her or Lily, but for myself. I'd touched everything, and I was finally whole.